back.
So many tanks there, just killing a lot of those Marines.
Roasting some Marines. The Vikings do pick off the Raven, and that point defense drone is, as we mentioned, pretty much going to be useless all of a sudden. So Fantasy, apologies, is in a very good position as far as, you know, he's got his third up and running now, and it's going to be an orbital. So he's really going to have an economic boost here in a second, and just the fact that these tanks are sitting here denying the third for Jimmy is huge at this stage of the game.
I certainly agree, and you know, I think the biggest problem with this right now that I see is the fact that Jimmy could just simply counterattack down this lane toward the third, and those tanks, without Marine support, really don't have the option to push into that expansion. Looks like, you know, this Jimmy is just going to push up with Marines and take out all the tanks, and this really shows you what happens when you don't have that Marine support with your tanks. Yeah,
definitely. I'd say overall, though, he's still in a really good position. He denied it for quite some time. He's transferring SCVs. He's got mules down at his third. Jimmy just now floating that thing over there. Looking at the unit tab, Fantasy has about a 6 harvester lead, so it's still very close, and I'd say it's anybody's game. It has nothing game-breaking has happened thus far.
Definitely a very close game. As you mentioned, you know, a 6 harvester lead, but the food count's still very close, and that means that ThisIsJimmy has a bigger army in supply.
Yeah, and I'm trying to look for the upgrades here. Marines are at 1-1 for Jimmy, and Fantasy is at 1-0, so he does have the upgrade advantage as well, which definitely in this matchup, Marine versus Marine, those upgrades are actually a really big deal.
They certainly are, and you know, of course, you know, upgrading your tanks as well, a great move in this matchup. That splash damage does so much damage to Marines. Fantasy sieging up here, he's got his Marines, he's got his Vikings. Jimmy, you know, opting for the medevacs instead of the Vikings, and just a lot of Marines here.
Oh, and medevacs are getting a little ahead of themselves there. Vikings actually pick one off. We do have an engagement. His army is actually caught in a really bad position here. These Marines are in a terrible spot.
I completely agree with that. And it looks like, you know, that engagement, maybe it almost looked like Jimmy had his army on move instead of attack move. He lost a ton to those stim Marines, but, you know, stim Marines, you know, going down so fast for both players, actually. And Fantasy almost losing that whole bunch, no medevacs on the field with that army for him. He's continuing just Viking production.
Yeah, that was not a good trade for Jimmy. The fact that he lost all his medevacs to the Vikings is actually a really big deal. That's a lot of gas, and those are not. You want those to build up. You want those to keep building energy as time goes on. And when you lose them like that, and you have to build new ones, it takes a big gas investment.
We do see another army moving out here. He needs to siege that tank, and he does siege just in time, causing, you know, ThisIsJimmy to pull back, trying to get him into range of his own tanks.
Right. I'd like to see him maybe put one of those tanks on the high ground, but I guess he does have Vikings, so it really doesn't matter. He's got those spotters, as you mentioned earlier. Getting vision of that LzNaga, though, would probably be a good thing for him.
I certainly agree. You know, and ThisIsJimmy, you know, sitting here with his forces, he just doesn't quite have the tank count to match what Fantasy has. Of course, that tank count also a disadvantage because it makes you much more immobile.
Yeah, 2 factories to 1 equals more than the guy with 2. So Fantasy is definitely leading in the tank count, which is a really good thing because in the end, at this stage of the game, I guess you could call late game, 20-minute mark, you probably have to favor the guy that has more tanks. Yeah, Marines are good. Yeah, they're mobile, but tanks in bunches do sick damage to anything on the ground.
I certainly agree. I am worried, though. You know, the problem with tanks, again, it's so immobile. A move like this, you know, is very dangerous for Fantasy to do because once he sieges up, Jimmy could just, and it looks like he is, just counterattack, and we might see a base trade scenario here as all of the Marines and these medevacs heading for the natural and the third of Fantasy.
Yeah, that's definitely what it's looking like. He's already pulled his SCVs. He's just going to let this planetary go. He's going to go for the counter push here. He's going straight into the heart of probably wanting to take out these production facilities as quickly as he can.
Certainly, and the problem with Terran is, of course, once you get their production facilities, they are dead in the water, unable to really do anything. And this natural, completely undefended, you know, definitely a poor situation for Fantasy, but he has cleared out that third and is moving into the natural.
Oh, and that splash damage from that one tank that Jimmy did not see did a lot of damage, but medvacs are filling up the Marines. That is a lot of Marines. This is definitely going to be a base trade. And I'd say right now that Fantasy is pushing in, and if he can get into this base, it's going to be close. I like the fact that he has tanks. I think that's going to be the difference, inevitably. We'll have to see how this plays out.
We definitely will have to see. A lot of his tanks unsieged at that natural, Fantasy now supply block, but still has higher supply than his opponent. But those barracks all going to be going down. A lot of those Marines and a tank rally to the back of the base there. Probably going to try and make a stand in that fog of war behind the smoke.
Yeah, both players are losing production facilities here. Fantasy's actually opting to take his tanks and take out this gold. He just laid a scan down, so he knows it's there. He takes this gold down, he's going to have a big advantage because he still has a third up and running with another orbital that he can choose to lift and maybe move over to the 9 o'clock position on the map.
And the gold does go down. A small contingent of Marines still in the main needs to hollow that out, I think Fantasy does. As we do see, ThisIsJimmy has floated a command center to the corner of the map, keeping himself from being revealed.
Yeah, and really at this point, Fantasy, all he's got to do is take these tanks back home and defend this third. There's no way, he's putting bunkers up, there's no way these Marines are going to penetrate all these tanks. So the small Marine force that he has in Jimmy's base, I'd like to see him keep, there we go, start working and taking out as much as you can here.
ThisIsJimmy, look at this creative play, elevating his units out of his base, to be able to move them all into combat, to try and break that base. Base trades always, very interesting to get into. We've actually seen some pro gamers lose because they just don't have the experience with base trades. Not a huge, a player who's gotten in some very awkward base trades and lost because of it. He just doesn't know how to handle himself. And I think right now we're seeing Fantasy handle himself very well in this situation.
Yeah, this is definitely a matchup with probably one of the more tricky base trades. I really like the position that Fantasy's in right now. His third is getting not mined out, but it's getting close. It's a lot of SCVs there. I'd really like to see him maybe lift this other orbital he's got and see if he can move out. With these tanks, he's almost completely wiped out everything Jimmy has. He's got a command center out in the middle of nowhere, floating in the bottom left corner of the map. All his SCVs are up at Fantasy's former main, I should say. Now his new main's over at the third. Both players are actually supply capped. Obviously, the army advantage and the fact that he's still mining, you have to say I like the position Fantasy's in. I just don't see Jimmy breaking this base with this many tanks. He's walling off very well as well.
And a money scan coming down from Jimmy, seeing all of that. Of course, it looks like he's just kind of checking around. Might actually push up this with all his SCVs, all his Marines. If he can break this front, this would be, I believe, over for Fantasy. But I don't think it's going to happen. Those barracks in the way, of course, and the tanks behind them. So much damage to those SCVs and Marines.
Yep, and here we go. This is the final push. This is it for Jimmy. He loses this army, the game is over.
And he's actually taken out all the tanks and all the Marines as well. This is going to do huge damage to this base. And the army of Fantasy rushing back to try and take that out. But 3-3 Marines do so much damage.
Yeah, they are just plowing through everything. He is pulling his SCVs back. He did lose his command centers, though. I do not believe he has one on the map now. Oh, never mind.
It is at the 3 o'clock expansion.
That could be the lifesaver, and his army is returning. These tanks are got to be really careful here. They do not want to come into this battle unsieged. They're going to have to probably cakewalk their way up here, slowly sieging up. Very smart play. Leapfrogging
I think this is it for ThisIsJimmy. Those Marines doing so much damage right there. Are taking so much damage rather from those siege tanks that did get sieged. ThisIsJimmy just loads up, going to go expansion hunting, and if he takes out this command center, we could definitely be in a poor place.
Yeah, the army from Fantasy is just superior at this point, though. All he has to do is not make a big mistake here. I do not believe we could see a really interesting deadlock here. I don't believe either player has the means, if that command center gets sniped, to get any type of real air unit out. So all they'd have to do is float a CC like Jimmy has out into the corner. And I don't believe that either player could kill it.
I think you are correct in that. You know, I will say that Fantasy, of course, if he could land a CC anywhere, he has the money to pretty much build whatever he wants. You know, he could even just transition straight into cattle bruisers, and I think he'd be just fine.
Yeah, and you know what? The Marine count for Jimmy is just shrinking by the moment. There was an engagement there when I was talking that we missed. I just don't know how he's going to win this game. If Shin can hold, or excuse me, Fantasy, God, I've done that twice this game. If Fantasy can hold this this 3 o'clock position, it's only a matter of time before this game is over.
I certainly agree. And you know what? This is Jimmy doing a lot of damage here. He still has those medevacs, but with the tanks, you know, if we do see some tank support by this expansion down here, I think you are right. There really isn't a way that Jimmy can come back in this game. He's just doing a lot of damage right now. I think he is hoping that if he eliminates all of these buildings and then goes and tries to snipe the command center, that he will win.
Yeah, and Fantasy's actually getting some Marines to go with his tank army, coming out of 2 racks up there at the 3 o'clock position. So he's in a really good spot. Jimmy's going to need a miracle to pull this one off.
I agree, and I'm really not sure why we don't see, you know, just literally Fantasy throwing down every tech building he desires. Because again, you know, he could with that 1,000 PS bank and the GG from Jimmy. The epic base trade has come to an end with a win on Fantasy's side.
Yep, it was only a matter of time. Well played game by both players. It was actually very entertaining. Base trades are always fun to watch. You know, it can come down to the smallest mistake, and all of a sudden, you thought you were in a good position, and then all of a sudden you could be losing the game because of a mistake. So.
I certainly agree. You know, and as you mentioned, base trades always fun to watch. We're going to go ahead and jump right into another game of Fantasies right after this, so stay tuned, guys. Again, this is Gwyn and Rohan's casting for you as part of LzRuha Gaming.
More coming up. Stay tuned.